All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Megan McKinney. I'm the Associate Director of the Duck Career Network in the UO Alumni Association. Part of the mission of the Duck Career Network is to offer career resources and programs to alumni at all career stages, as well as encourage UO students to gain a career readiness mindset through connecting with other alumni. We hope to build a community of like-minded ducks seeking and sharing career advice and insights and making new professional connections. As part of that mission, I am happy to introduce today's program, AI Every Day at Work, in partnership with the Ducks in Tech Alumni Group. This program is led by the Ducks in Tech content producer and moderator, Nick McElveen. Nick is the founder and managing director of Embarcatech, a Silicon Valley-based venture builder and consultancy. He helps build businesses throughout the technology industry, including transformative digital systems, climate tech, and clean economy transition. Previously, Nick spent 2 decades building new technology and services to market in fintech, commerce, and mobile. Nick continues to assist high-growth companies with strategy, go-to-market, and fundraising. Nick earned a degree from the U of O in communication studies and a minor in business administration. He's also a member of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. So Nick, I'm gonna hand it off to you to introduce Chris and Allie and get things going.
Thank you, Megan. Ducks in Tech members are University of Oregon alumni helping other alumni in the technology industry, providing advice, experience, and sharing industry knowledge, discussing career growth, and creating networking opportunities among us. Ducks in Tech, in association with the University of Oregon Duck Career Network, intends to help make better decisions, help you make better decisions for your job, your organization, and your career. We help identify challenges and opportunities in the technology field. That brings us to today's topic, AI every day at work. We see the news coverage on artificial intelligence increasing daily. You probably have used services such as ChatGPT for some time now. The industry reached an inflection point in the past year with an explosion of product and services releases related to generative AI. Most software and technology companies are now racing to incorporate AI as core functionality of their offerings. Foundational technologies like ChatGPT, Google Bard, Microsoft Copilot, and others, including open source models, are quickly becoming mainstream faster than any previous technology adoption. This is not a trend. We are experiencing a transformation. Generative AI is on course to change the way we work significantly and rapidly. The accelerated, widespread adoption of AI technology will impact your job, your organization, and your future career if it hasn't already. Entire sectors of the economy will grow, evolve, and potentially be disrupted. The time to start learning about the changing workflows of the future and incorporating them into your day-to-day role is now. Today, we will focus our discussion on the basics of these technologies in helping you in your career. How can you use generative AI to be more effective every day? How can you adopt this disruptive technology to be more productive and to help propel your career? To maintain focus on today's topic, we'll not cover more existential and frankly more controversial issues such as the greater impacts on society and so on. We will segment this conversation into several parts. First, our panelists will share their career journeys and their involvement in AI. Next, we'll discuss generative AI and its broader impacts on work. We'll discuss using the technology services in everyday roles. Both Allie and Chris will provide a few use cases. We'll be sure to discuss potential concerns and provide some words of caution using this new technology. Finally, we'll also answer a few questions from the audience, as many as we can over the next hour. Please submit your question in the Q&A box. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's Ducks in Tech panelists for our discussion. Both are University of Oregon alumni. First, we have Allie Berger, founder and CEO of Etta, a mission-driven technology company transforming the future of fashion to partners, people, and the planet. Previously, Ali was a business designer, researcher, and journalist. Ali developed products and services utilizing emerging technologies for Fortune 500 companies. Ali earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from the University of Oregon and a Master's of Journalism from Northwestern University. Also joining us today, we have Chris Bocchicchio, Data Analytics and AI Sales Specialist for Google. Chris is a technology professional with over a decade of experience in data, AI, resourcing, and scaling sales, as well as engineering. Chris currently advises companies in the AI and generative AI field with Google Cloud. Chris earned a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from the University of Oregon in 2012 and an MBA from the University of San Francisco in 2020. Welcome, Chris and Ali. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure. Starting with you, Ali, then Chris, please tell the audience about your professional background and your career journey. Please tell us a bit about what you do in your current role, as well as what your organization does. And also, please tell us about your experience with AI so far. So first to Ali and then to Chris.
Absolutely. So I've had a very non-traditional journey to get to this point in my career, which many of you, I think, on the call can relate to. And a lot of what we're going to talk about as we move through this call is continuing to transition your skill sets well after graduation. And so that's rung true for me. I started my career as a sports reporter for NBC Sports, ESPN, and a couple of the big organizations out there. And then I actually, in the third month with the company, half of our LA office at ESPN was laid off, which led me to realize that there was a massive shift happening in the world of technology as it related to the business I was in. And I became way more interested in the business as a whole of how tech was moving than day-to-day content creation. So I actually, after grad school at Northwestern, I took a job underneath the chief of staff for Accenture Interactive Global, one of the largest tech implementers and strategizers in the world, where I led two roles. I was a business designer where I developed products and services, leading cross-functional teams to create new products with emerging tech, unlocking $100 million plus revenue stream opportunities for Fortune 500 C-suites across every major industry and business sector. While serving in addition to that, I was also one of their 8 global trends forecasters. So determining the future of the intersection of business, design, and technology. And it was an incredible opportunity. Through all of those experiences, I actually served one of the largest fashion clients in the world that were facing a couple major issues. And I'd previously worked on a makeup try-on for a major makeup retailer out there and figured if you can do that with makeup, why not do it with clothes? And so now I'm the founder of a company called ETA. It stands for Earthlings Taking to Action. And what we do is you do a 360 spin in front of your phone. We take more measurements of your body than a tailor to generate your own personalized shopping storefront. We launched in the spring, and how it works is we've curated over 100 premium and luxury ready-to-wear brands all into one shopping feed. And so everything that you see has a 99.5% accuracy of fitting your body before you buy. So it's a pleasure to be with you all, and I'm excited to dive into this space.
Thank you, Ali.
Yeah, and on my side, just like Ali, a very non-traditional way that I got into AI. So I started my career in higher education and human resources. So I started scheduling interviews when I started at Google. That was my first job before moving into recruiting. And I quickly learned in both roles that data was super powerful and I liked it. I really liked spreadsheets. I really liked working with data. I was self-taught in SQL just to do the basics. And I saw how much power there was in being able to manipulate and work with data. And so that's why I went back and actually got my MBA in big data and analytics, and to really focus on that and building very basic machine learning models. From there, I just started looking around at following this interest of working with data. And so I ended up moving into our product teams and working on our go-to-market strategy and go-to-market work around data and AI with Google Cloud. And I got even more, infatuated with what AI can do and some of the problems that it can tackle. And from there, decided, why am I just building these solutions and these go-to-market motions? I actually want to go work with customers and talk to customers. So that's actually what I'm doing in my current role. But very different from when I first came out of University of Oregon, kind of not really sure what I wanted to do. And now having a very clear vision of, I want to work in this space and I want to keep doing cool things in it. And that might change. I think that's a secret no one really tells you, is that even when you come out of University of Oregon and you graduate, you're still probably going to have a few career transitions in there and start doing very different things. But in getting started with AI, it was just being interested and continuing to explore that interest for me.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to stay with you for a moment. Let's start with the basics regarding AI. There's been so much news lately about AI. I was down in the valley today in Santa Clara, and on the drive up for about an hour, I'd say about 30% of the billboards along Highway 101 have AI, including credit card companies and so forth. In fact, machine learning and artificial intelligence programs have existed for decades. Please help us distinguish between AI, predictive AI, generative AI, and perhaps even large language models. So we're using the same nomenclature and terminology to help us set the stage for today's sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really fun to watch this evolution, because last year when we were talking about AI, I will tell you, before ChatGPT really took over the world, there were conversations about it, but it was not as mission critical as it is today, even though we who have seen the work that AI can do knew how mission critical it could be for organizations. So when we think about it, Nick, you rightly pointed out, we've all been experiencing AI every day, whether that be Siri or Google Home or Alexa or autocorrect or the marketing recommendations you get in your inbox. Those are all being powered by AI. I mean, Google search, that is AI at its core, right? So this is not something new in terms of it. I think what you are seeing is the generative AI piece of that. And really what I like to think about it is, traditional AI, you're predicting something. You're trying to guess, what is that next sentence? What is that the right product recommendation is going to be for you when you go to any website? Or you're trying to understand which customer is going to churn from your customer base, right? But with generative AI, so much of the time it's about what can actually be created by the computer based on all of the information that it has. And I think that has so many great possibilities. But it isn't going to predict, whether or not Allie might buy a product that I'm selling for me. And so that's really how we're looking at that differentiation. And with generative AI, there is something that powers that called large language models. That comes from a technology that Google open sourced back in 2017 called Transformers. Very into the technical deep dive there, and I won't go into too much on that, but really it's something that is allowing machines to learn and understand a little bit faster than they ever have, well, much faster than they ever have before, in order to help predict and create that content for us or create what is needed.
Thanks, Chris. Allie, any other thoughts there?
I guess to sum up a little bit, I like to talk about everything in terms of the human interaction with the computer. I think that's the easiest way to understand it most of the time. And so the biggest way that I would kind of sum it up is that with predictive AI, as we kind of talked about the evolution at the beginning with predictive AI, the goal was to take a bunch of big data across disparate sources and bring it together in a cohesive place to help the human actually make decisions based on this conglomerate of facts, figures, and analytics. But now, actually, rather than the human making the decisions themselves for what to do with that information or analytics, the AI is actually able to do much of that decision making for the human. And so rather than having to be the pure creator as the human of whatever output needs to come from the data that you're taking in from predictive AI, you're now actually leveraging AI further along the journey in order to have it create or generate for you many of the outputs that traditionally we might expect humans to do in the workplace. And so inherently, and we're going to get into this, I know, very shortly here, that's going to rapidly transition the expectations of a human and their interaction with computers in the workforce for many of us, most of us here on the call.
And perhaps, are there any parallels to interacting with generative AI in natural language, in communicating with someone maybe by texting with mobile phones. We miss out on that voice tone and facial expressions and so on. What are your thoughts regarding generative AI?
Example that you just gave, Nick, is pure gold, because much of the interaction that we have with the computer loses much of that same sentiment. So I like to refer to AI as a baby genius, or generative AI as a baby genius, for many people who don't really know much about it, largely because it's like it's like a baby being born with all of the knowledge of written text, video, imaging that is out there across the web, without any of the human sentiment, context, or social interaction history to go off of in order for it to know what to do with all of that information. And so that's super critical right now, especially in terms of how we think about the capabilities that AI has versus how the human can work with the AI to enhance the capabilities of outputs. And so one of the big things that I like to talk about is I am a firm believer in AI isn't going to take over everything, but rather, which is like this scary sentiment that often gets put out there, but rather we know that a human making a decision is only so successful, and AI making a decision in and of itself is so successful. And together, the output working together is significantly higher in terms of the validity of any piece of information, or the potential outcomes, especially for wonderful things like healthcare outcomes, improving those, or safety, security, all that kind of stuff. And so rather than really thinking about the AI as the information gather for the human as ways to speed up the process of what you're doing, but that similar to a baby, it doesn't know how to interact with other human beings at a party, for example. You have to teach it how to do that, or how to read expressions or send feelings, all the tone, all that kind of stuff. So similar to text, a lot of those natural human interactions kind of fall out, and that's where we have to come in to help the machine.
Thank you, Ellie. And Chris, what would you, if you were to describe a personality for generative AI, how would you describe generative AI?
Yeah, I can't word it better than Ali did on that one. I think, a really, really smart baby is such an apt analogy for how we think about AI, right? It can do a lot. But I think I'll take it a little bit in how we interact with that. As Ali talked about, it is a new form of interaction with the computer, right? And I think for some on this call, maybe you've always known how to interact with the computer because you always had Google search, or you had some sort of way to interact with Google or another search type feature. And so that's been really natural. But I think we're going to have to relearn that. You're going to have to learn a little bit on how do I get from the large language model, whichever I'm using, the right type of information, right? And how do I use it in a different way? I think Ali is absolutely right in that it won't replace the person. We call that human in the loop. There will always be a human in the loop in so many different capacities of the use of AI, especially the larger the problem we're trying to tackle, the more there's going to be a need for a human in the loop. But I can't word it better than Ali already did. It's a very, very smart baby that's still learning.
How does understanding that help us get better results from large language models as it relates to sort of the comparison with the human brain? Are there parallels there that the audience should be aware of?
Yeah, the really cool thing about the underlying technology, and I'm sorry if your eyes are glazing over a little bit here, but we're going to go a little bit into the tech here, which is the algorithms are actually built off the model of the human brain. That is actually how a transformer and a large language model is built on the back end of it. And so as you hear more about all these different more parameters that each of these large language models are starting to use, and you're like, what does that even mean? It's more connections in the node of a human brain, which is really, really cool. I think, what does that mean for you as you're interacting with it? You got to go and play. You've got to go and start to experience it and start to try with it. And also you need to take a little bit of a grain of salt with it. You need to check the work that is coming out of the AI, because you need to make sure that, it's not giving you a bad fact, that it's not hallucinating, that we talk about a lot within the AI world, especially with large language models, that it's not coming up with something that isn't actually factual. So I think as we're interacting, you have to remember it's built just like your brain, but it isn't totally there yet.
Allie, any thoughts there?
One thing I would add too is that though, yes, this is all built on large neural networks, however, it is worth noting that the networks are only built to replicate certain parts of the human brain at this point. So for example, like most of the stuff that you hear about is largely driven by what we can do with our human brains from the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive functioning. So like the decision making that we do on a day-to-day basis, most of what we do to execute any type of thing in our job, it really isn't meant yet to do things from a sensory processing perspective. It can't feel. And so most of what comes out of the computer, for example, when we ask it questions like that, are ideas of what it should feel based on all of the lore that has been put into these large language models that's telling it how to feel. And that has the potential to get more advanced over time. But I think I just want to double down on the fact that we are you are the expert at being human. The AI is not the expert at being human. And so anything that might be like a sensory component of who and how you are outside of that like executive decision making in the front of your brain is really difficult for the computer to have, especially because we as humans largely feel what we feel from our amygdala, the emotional center of our brain that actually hits our brainstem or comes up through our brainstem before we get to executive functioning. And so we feel and we base so much of what we experience or the decision making that we make based on past experiences that we've had as humans. However, like I said before with the baby example, because the AI doesn't have that ability, that's where we have to step in and really try to implement the human aspect of this, which is going to be paramount in making or building the most inclusive and diverse types of models out there, which we're definitely going to get into shortly.
Indeed, we are. And I'm going to move on for a moment, and then we'll circle back to that topic. In a statement made yesterday, Microsoft detailed a study of its initial Copilot generative AI users, and I'll read a brief excerpt from that statement. Microsoft said, 8 months ago, we introduced Copilot for Microsoft's 365 to reduce digital debt and increase productivity so people can focus on the work that is uniquely human. What everyone wants to know now is, will generative AI really transform work, and how? Already, Copilot makes people more productive and creative and saves time. Early users don't want to go back to working without it. 77% said that they don't want to give it up. And this is just the beginning. As use of generative AI at work spreads, the real opportunity is to not only transform personal productivity, but lift the capability of the entire organization. Copilot sets a new baseline, one where every employee gains the skills to write, design, code, analyze data, and more, and it amplifies expertise, taking work from good to exceptional. Obviously, that is a corporate statement, but still, it's a telling of where this has come from and where it's going. Allie and Chris, let's take a few minutes to zoom in to discuss being effective using generative AI every day in our jobs. Not now that we understand that we're dealing with a baby genius, what are some new ways to interact with these new technologies, and how does prompting enable better results?
I can start here, Chris, if that works, because I think you're going to touch on a lot of the prompting expertise.
Yeah.
In a moment. So in terms of how we think about interacting as human beings, this is a whole new paradigm shift for us in terms of how we communicate, largely because when you're a baby and you grow up, you learn how to communicate with other human beings around you and read each other. But usually that's on a one-to-one capacity. So I talk to Nick, I talk to Chris talks back to me, Nick talks back to me, and I have different expectations of each of them as individuals with whole different sentiments. The unique thing is that up to date, or up till now, for the most part, most of what we do with the computer is a one-to-one interaction. So for example, Chris gave the example earlier of you type something into Google spits something back to you. That's one version of Google that you're asking questions to, and that's one version of Google that's giving the answers back to you. The unique thing about AI is that it's a one-to-many relationship instead. So it's one-to-one, but with many different ones. So what I mean by that is that For example, let's go with a Bard or a Chat GPT. When you open a tab in one of those tools, you can actually prompt the tool to train it to be any kind of person that you want it to be, to give any kinds of outputs that you want it to have, with all of the different contexts that's available. However, I can, for example, on my team at Edda, we have many different virtual employees that we utilize. So for every different tab, for example, there might be one is a finance person and one is a marketing person and one is a comms person and one is a like HR, you get the idea. But it's this beautiful relationship where you actually can build context over time to teach that tab how to behave or how to be, and then start to prompt it with outputs that you can refine over time, and then continue to provide examples to. So rather than having that one-to-one Google like we talked about, now it's one to as many things as you could potentially think of that you might need help with or want to engage for some kind of generation creation. The example that I like to give the most in terms of how to be most effective with it is definitely that, like we talked about before, the computer doesn't have the context unless you tell it the context. And so you really have to think about it as if you're talking to a child who's never been in the world before. For example, I can tell almost 10 out of 10 when people use ChatGPT on LinkedIn because it sounds like the tone of ChatGPT. So the example of that I would give is like the system naturally has a way of verbiage, tone, vocabulary, like all those kinds of things. However, I make sure that so that it sounds like me and it's as effective as I would like it to be in terms of how I personally choose to interact with people. For example, like on this call, I don't talk the same way that Chris talks, that Nick talks, that Megan talks. And it would be really weird if we were all the same. That's the whole point of having various humans out there and the uniqueness of that, the individuality that you are. And so when I make sure that when I'm prompting the system, that I give examples of types of text, or for example, if I'm writing an email, I might give it 3 different versions of an email that I've written so that it gets a sense of, okay, this is what Allie sounds like. This is how we want Allie to sound, versus like, I might want one of my virtual assistants to sound very different than I do. And so in that case, we give it a whole different tone, persona, all that kind of stuff. And the beauty of this is that you have the ability to design that however you want to. But I'll let Chris take it away with the prompt expertise.
Allie, as you talk about designing it, I think what's so unique is it's no longer going in and coding it to actually design it. You're just using natural language processing, or you're just using your natural language to really help redefine how does that program interface with you, right? And how does it work with you? I'll take it a little bit in a different way. You know, with the prompt engineering, you know, it's going in, it's playing, it's really trying different prompts, running them multiple times. But I think there's the next level up when it comes into your day-to-day and how is this going to affect your workplace. The one that, you know, we're seeing a lot at Google for a lot of customers is, how do I get all of my company's tribal knowledge, all of the knowledge that, you know, organizations have built over many, many years, so that it's not just having to be passed from person to person or document to document, but really I could have a large language model sit on top of it. And then I could ask questions of that large language model to not just get me the right answer of, hey, where do I get my benefits, or how does this process work, and, you know, really spell it out for me, but even take it the step further. My favorite example, and we're starting to get there, we're not there yet, but, you know, as a salesperson, I could say, hey, I have a customer in the healthcare industry and they're interested in AI. Build me a presentation for this customer around healthcare using our AI platform. And it could actually build that out for me. Now, is it going to be 100%? Absolutely not. It's probably going to get me 60% there, but it's going to get me 60% further in a lot less time than if I tried to build it out myself or go find someone else's deck and copy it. And is this up to date? All of those things. I think that's where some of the evolution in our workplace is really going to start to happen, where, you know, I'm not very creative. I don't do a great deck in terms of building it out myself and making it look pretty. But if I could have a large language model build it out for me, and then I can start to edit it and make it even better, so that I can spend less time building out a deck, which would take me hours and hours, and more time focusing, I think, Nick, to your point, and what Microsoft found with Copilot, on the work that is truly human, which is making sure it fits the context of the meeting I'm about to go into and having that conversation. So I think that's where some of the, I would say frontline workers, folks that are using this type of work every day, that's where they're going to find the most impact into how they interact with that tribal knowledge within their organization.
Thank you for that, Chris. What tasks will we incorporate generative AI into our jobs? For example, researching, it sounds like that's already happening, processing data, fact-finding, editing, and I'm going to also put marketing out there because we have a question from the audience that I'll follow up. But where is the most likely first several tasks that generative AI will really be doing for most people? Is that again research and data analysis, or what do you folks think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll leave the marketing to Ali because she's going to be much more up in the know of the marketing side than I will. But yeah, I think for generative AI specifically, it is going to be some of that knowledge repository, that knowledge creation. I think the part that excites me a lot, only because I just tend to dabble into the coding, but like creating SQL code for me really quickly or helping me with data analysis, even though, yeah, I'm pretty good with data analysis and I have some good experience with it. But what I'm excited about is for those that don't. If you're like, data scares me, spreadsheets scare me, that's great, because this is like your time to shine, because all of these large language models specifically trained around Excel or Sheets or any other data platform you might be using is going to be able to help you become a data superhero within your organization, right? We even had a product launch recently where I can just say, hey, show me my revenue for the last 6 months and put it into a bar chart for me. And it created it for us like within 30 seconds, right? Like even things as simple as that, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of new changes and a lot of areas where maybe you haven't done this before, and now you're going to be able to just by asking the right question.
I can't say that I ever thought I would become a pivot table superhero, but now anything's possible. Ali, turning to you, what do you think? What tasks do you think will incorporate generative AI most of us kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Great question. Well, as you were saying that, all I could think about was that most of what I did for the 4 years of consulting that I did can now be done by ChatGPT or Bard, which is kind of crazy. How much time that would have saved for analysis and deck making and all that fun stuff. But really, so Chris talked a lot about the generative text opportunities or numbers opportunities. I'll jump into a little more of where things move from there. So as we know, AI started largely with text-based large language models. And so there's a lot that can be done there, from the research, fact-finding, copy editing, all those kinds of fun things, creation of anything that you need words and numbers with. However, a lot of what we do at Edda and what is being done a lot in the marketing video production spaces is much more heavily focused on taking the text and then moving that into image and motion graphic and video opportunities. And then all of the different ways that you can utilize those types of information and physical models of things. So I'll give a couple examples. At Edda, for example, what we're using data for is, and built on large language or machine learning models, is we're in the process of building the world's largest repository of human body shape data. And so with that, actually what we're doing is with that, we can make a cross-industry benchmark of all of the different types of body shapes out there, and then all of the different ways that clothing is cut around the world. And so using that data or leveraging that, there's so many different ways that this can go, but a big one is actually starting to leverage we call the fashion industry like the last data dinosaur. So 80% of all product that's made today goes straight to landfill. It's never worn by a human being. And that's a huge cost to brands and retailers out there globally. And then on top of that, all of us shipping and returning things, now that we buy online 5 times more than we did 5 years ago, we actually return 50% more product than we did when we just typically bought in store. And so part of what we're doing is we're actually making an understanding so that businesses have all the analytics to know, okay, these are the products that are selling. These are the cuts that sell in this country versus this country versus this country. Because when you go to Japan, the average person is not shaped the same way that someone that lives in Wisconsin is, for example. But brands cut all clothing the same way internationally for the most part right now. And so that's one example, is to actually inform and generate the future of fashion. So you can take out a lot of what's needed by a designer, for example, and purely we can understand your tastes and preferences based on what you're shopping for. And then all of a sudden, clothing is generated exactly for you based on your evolutionary style preferences. So it grows with you over time. That's one example of a more physical, tangible way of doing this. In terms of the video aspect, I'll give an example that I'm loving playing around with right now. It's called Pika. Everyone in the marketing space should definitely be playing with it. Currently, it's a Discord channel. So if you're not on Discord, definitely learn it. That's where most of the cutting edge AI stuff is happening, getting played with, so on and so forth. But how it works is it actually takes, Pika generates motion picture quality video with multiple camera angles all through text prompt. And so it takes out the need for an entire production crew or a director or multiple cameramen or women. You get the example. But the reason that that's important is it's going to quickly change what the image and text of marketing campaigns look like. And it's all going to be generative based on what we know to be true of the consumer. So right now, a lot of it is like, it's text prompt based. So it's not perfect yet, but it's getting way faster than it was, or way more accurate than it was 3 months ago, for example. Like, it's scary how fast this stuff is moving. And so definitely go in and start to play with those things, because if you're a marketer who's used to hiring videographers, photographers, editors, coming up with a whole like branding campaign and doing the strategy around it, a lot of those things are going to get squashed into one role.
Should marketers disclose the use of AI in marketing materials? We didn't circle back on that. A quick thought from both of you.
So right now, it's actually not required to do so. However, legislation is changing rapidly in this space. And so that's one of those perfect examples of you have to update yourself every month right now, because it is ever evolving. For example, if you're for, one of the biggest things that's about to change is if your organization or product or service that you're marketing is for profit, that's a very different expectation of disclosure than it is for nonprofits, for example, or open sourced activities that are not for profit. And so definitely thinking about how that interacts with your business model is something to keep a super close eye on.
And to the question, what is the responsibility of marketers then to disclose that, right? Yeah. And what does that look like? And I think, that is probably going to be something that society is going to have to end up deciding, and there will probably be some sort of legal justification for it, right? But I think this isn't too different than what we saw with Photoshop, right? Or all the filters. And I think everyone's probably seen, probably plenty of examples of where social media and marketing has, been edited, been cropped, been changed around in order to make the best photo come to life. So I'm not sure we're going to see that. Of course, there is the image generation that I'm sure a lot of folks have seen of, that it can be useful in that marketing of creating that branding campaign. And I love Ali's recommendation about, it's not just a stagnant image anymore. It's not even just a stagnant video anymore, but it is a multi-dimensional video. And I think, if you were paying attention in the news, this is a lot of what the SAG-AFTRA strike was about, is the usage of AI. And while it can do a lot of things, what does that mean for, how we make film, how we make art? And where does that come into play? And so that's going to be a much larger conversation that I don't think we'll be able to address fully today, but definitely some really interesting questions there as we come through of like, well, then how do we as consumers need to be even smarter about the content that we are consuming? But I have a lot of faith. This is a very similar issue that we faced when the internet first came around, right? And there was all of this content now at our disposal, and we had to learn. I remember in 5th grade learning, how do you look at what is real and what's not on the internet, right? And so we're going to have to get smarter as society and as consumers. But I think there probably will be some legal ramifications coming down the line too of what needs to be disclosed and how.
Chris, do you want to touch base on your knowledge repository, the use cases that you had thought about? You want to mention those now while we're still
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Two use cases that I'll bring up. I think I talked a little bit about that knowledge repository already, about, being able to ask a question of your data as an organization, or of just how do I do things. And I think there was a question in there about, HR processes, right? The really big thing with AI, and we haven't really talked about this a whole lot, but what is the cost of failure? That is how much you are going to trust the AI system, right? So, for example, when I write an email to Ali and say, hey, looking forward to connecting later today, I can trust the AI for the most part to write that without me needing to look at it for too long, because what's the cost of failure? It says the wrong thing. It maybe probably doesn't misspell something, but it doesn't use my tone of voice. That's okay. But if I'm going to ask the AI to alter my benefits for me, or to provide me information around, hey, what are my benefits in case, my partner gets sick, right? I think that is a place where there's a couple things that you can do within the technology stack to help make sure that it doesn't hallucinate and makes a mistake. But also, I have my HR hat on because I was in there for so many years. What are the legal ramifications by AI giving that answer, right? Does it point me just to a link with all the information on, partner healthcare benefits, or does it give me actual recommendations? So there's a lot of ways that we can go through this. If the AI does make a mistake, I think that's where your organization has to be ready to have a conversation about, is this tool ready for production, and having that right testing. But ultimately, there needs to be a human in the loop still. The more severe the consequences for AI getting it wrong, or the cost of failure, the more there needs to be a human in the loop there. The other really interesting use case, and I just heard about this today, so Nick, I appreciate you giving me this capability to talk about it, but a little more big picture, but AI is actually being used to help with protection of endangered species in the rainforest. And so what they're doing is they set up a bunch of these sound sensors all over the rainforest, and then they collect all of this audio data about all the different sounds. And based on all this audio data, really quickly analyze it to say, hey, that was the sound of bird calls, that was the sound of animals in distress, or more importantly, that was the sound of gunfire, right? And that was the sound of poachers. And we need to now go send someone to investigate, right? And I think that's some of the power that we're also seeing with AI. Now, it's not generative AI, but it is being able to take large sets of data and then be able to understand and then quickly give an answer to people to go out and do something about it, right? So there's some really, really cool use cases. We go on and on about different use cases depending on the industry, but some really cool stuff coming out there.
Well, Chris, since you brought up hallucinations,
yes,
we're gonna transition to concerns and words of caution.
Yes.
And I know primarily due to time,
Yep.
we could be on for half a day. There's just so much good material here. We've heard many concerns about generative AI, from information security to intellectual property challenges. And it would be prudent to cover areas of caution. What are some practical pieces of advice to reduce risk, whether it be in the security of IP and data?
There are a lot of big things for us to think about when it comes to all of this information. The first is, like we talked about before, the baby genius brain. Well, I had mentioned that there's all this different context that's come into that brain, so that that genius can make the decisions that it makes, or the recommendations that it makes. One of the biggest things that we haven't talked about, and you might have seen some of in the news, is that most of the large language models out there that are informing the decision-making of these machines are largely what we call weird bias. So that means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So most of the information that's come into these systems has those biases already. In addition to that, we know with examples like Books 3 is a huge input. So that's like the history of books that lives on Google, has been used by ChatGPT, for example, is mostly or has largely only focused on white male authors. So when you think about that, that's leaving out many other groups and perspectives out there to inform the machine on literally any output that it gives. This is super important because right now this whole space is the Wild West. And there's a lot of effort being made from regulators and third-party nonprofits in order to start to call out how we can more effectively use this version of the internet and this version of technology and its advancement moving forward in order to create more equitable and diverse recommendations and outcomes. The reason that I bring that up is because that's on all of us as decision makers to stay in the know about, understand which tools are being the most inclusive with their and equitable with their information or their large language models or imagery or video. Those are things that are really important for anybody out there that are decision makers to think about when you're choosing which tools to use. An example of the ways that some of this has, or the other big thing to bring up here is obviously that we can't trust these machines to be perfect all the time. Chris mentioned some of the hallucination before. And so I know many of us have seen how this goes wrong, but you can't take what comes out of these generators for fact. 100%. So examples of that might be, I know that I'm sure many of us have heard about the legal case in which a lawyer came to the Supreme Court and referenced a case that was not real. It was generated by ChatGPT as a way of promoting the argument of the lawyer when in fact it was not based in any factual information. That person was disbarred. There's lots of other examples out there of people using it in what I would call a lazy way. So not actually doing the work of the human plus the machine. They're relying solely on the machine. Another example would be journalists who have used AI to create articles for them, leveraging facts that aren't real. So the point of all of this, kind of if you bubble it up to how does this impact your daily life and your job, is anyone Chris talked about before, like the level or the risk of failure. And so given what the risk of failure is for what you're using the tool for, you really need to make sure that you're fact checking everything that comes out of it in order to, because one bad decision can tarnish the reputation and the trust of any given brand out there. And many of you work hard to ensure that your businesses have that trust of consumers or customers. So it's really important to uphold that the same way that you would as the human doing the work yourself.
Yeah, and I think from the organizational perspective, Ali, you did such a great job of talking about like kind of the individual things. I think when we think about an organization, right, when ChatGPT 3.5 first came out, a lot of companies were banning the use of it. The reason being is any public large language model that you use, when you agree to those terms and conditions, which I know no one reads because they're 1,000 pages, but that means any data you put in there, anything you type in there, anything that you put into that large language model can then be used in the large language model for other customers, right? So it's really important that if your company is interested in a large language model specifically for your company, what kind of security is being set up for your provider or how you're setting up your large language model so that it doesn't feed back into what we call it is the foundational model, right? At Google, we say, hey, you get a frozen version of the foundational model that you could then add all of your data into, but all of your data will never go back into the original foundational model. It's a cut in time of that foundational model to protect your security and data, because as a Google Cloud seller, I don't want your data. I don't want to know what's in it. I just want you to be able to have access to the right tool that's going to help your company at that time. So I think Ali hit all the really big ones when it comes to that security and data piece of it. That's where I think it's important to understand a little bit of how that works.
Just as we gain information from the computer's gaining information from us. And so another big thing to point out is that if you work in any kind of industry in which there are data protections, privacy and security protections, really think about what you're putting into the system. For example, probably don't put HIPAA violated information in there about people's healthcare or asking it to help you make some kind of major decision around that. In addition, GDPR, I know I just saw somebody asking about copyright issues and the legality of that. That's all. And I just sat on a call with a lot of the biggest lawyers in the tech space right now, and they're all saying the same thing. This is such a moving target that you really have to update yourself on what the current regulations are monthly, bi-monthly at this point, because because it's ever evolving, and you don't want to put yourself in a situation where something was kosher 2 months ago and now it's not, and you get in trouble.
Yeah. One other kind of fear I have, or worry, that when we talk about like that weird scale, Ali, that we're talking about, one thing that I'm really proud about with Google and my time in recruiting, I will tell you, there is no AI in the recruitment process at Google. There is a human that looks at every single resume that comes through. Now, it doesn't mean that that's a better process, but I think for right now it is better, because from what Ali was talking about, AI is only as good as the data it's trained on. And I think in a recruitment capacity, it is very, very scary for me to think that AI would ever make a decision based on looking at resumes or taking interview feedback and analyzing that, unless it's strictly code. But even then, I still have some questions on it, to actually, make a decision or help advise the human at the end of that process. Recruitment and interviewing is still one of those arts and sciences that hasn't been fully tapped, because it's so reliant on people, that is a place where I do not trust AI really in any step of that process, except for maybe in some types of like really specific coding environments. So definitely some areas to think about of concern if your organization is going down that route.
And let's be sure to actually touch on the term hallucination. What does the audience need to know? Ali, you had touched on that earlier about it's a starting point as far as a response to a query. But effectively, the software is instructed to provide answers upon receiving a query, and generative AI rarely says that it doesn't know the answer to a question. In some cases, it's just a complete fabrication. This is referred to as an error with confidence. There are probably people that we all know that error with confidence. Those are perhaps some of the most dangerous people. How do we, it's beyond garbage out. How do we socialize this among people that are starting to use generative AI and awareness of hallucinations?
Great question. So similar to every other type of major technological innovation out there, there's this point that we've hit and the curve. So many of us have been on this call, have been working in AI for some time now. I think I'm this way this time. And so that's like very low adoption. We've gotten to this point where the media and the launch of ChatGPT spiked the interest of many day-to-day folks outside of the space to really start to see the potential of it. And so we get this high spike in what we think it can do. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, we've started to play with the tools and they're not perfect, right? So there's this drop in interest or hope of what the technology can do. And we call that the trough of disillusionment in many circles of the technology world. And what that means is you're really not happy with the outputs necessarily. You thought it was going to do all these magical things and solve all of your job, and it's not doing it. But the important thing to remember with that is that that's largely because these models are so new, and also computing power is only so fast right now. That's rapidly changing. There's many companies out there who will and will continue to have advantages in that computing power space. And so these things are going to get better, faster, super quickly. But right now we really have to question the answers. And I think Chris gives the best example of the hallucination aspect. So Chris, I'll let you take it.
Yeah, absolutely. So hallucination, what is it? It's pretty much that the computer is telling you something that's not real. And I think the court case example, hopefully, Ali, that's the one you were thinking of from our previous conversations, is arguably my favorite one, where a lawyer used ChatGPT to build out their case, and it referenced another case. That other case wasn't real, and there was no other case. ChatGPT just made it up. That is what we're referring to as hallucination. Now, there are plenty of ways and methodologies now that are coming out to help fight against hallucination, and how you build the model and the requirements that you put into it with citations, etc. But that is one thing that you do need to be very aware of in using these products. And once again, it goes back to our earlier conversation. What's the cost of failure here, right? If you get it wrong, what does that actually mean? And that's going to tell you how much of a fine-tooth comb do you need to read over or understand the results that you're getting, whether that be an image, whether that be text, whether that be something else. So yeah, when it comes to hallucination, it's really that it's making things up.
Interesting new world we live in here. One question from the audience. I wanted to make sure we partially covered it, but it's a very important one, and so I'm going to repeat it. How can we ensure that AI benefits the broader society and that it doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities? We touched on it a bit, but wanted to open that up to both of you, sort of as we're coming around the corner here. Just a few more minutes. Thoughts from both of you, please.
Yeah, I'll go back to the recruiting example just because it's a fairly easy one, but it duplicated in any sort of sensitive area. It's only good as the data it knows. So if you have a track record, or if organizations have a track record of things going wrong because of human errors and human decisions, the AI is only going to amplify that problem, right? It's not going to fix the problem of recruiting being a biased processy within an organization. It's just going to amplify that. So it's really important to know what is the data that's feeding into this model and what is the data you have already that's feeding into that.
The other consideration that I think is super important, and I'll make this quick, I am very clearly a woman. There are very few of me in this space. The reason that I'm bringing that up is because 51% of the population is female, and yet there's very few people making decisions for how these things are made and what language models they use to actually make sure that the population is represented. And so inherently we are also white on the call, right? That's another big thing to point out. And so those are things to think about in terms of if your organization is working with these tools and creating regulations, making sure that you have various diverse voices at the table to create the most inclusive and equitable products and services possible.
Thank you for that. In Ducks in Tech, a couple of years ago, we did a diversity hiring process in tech session solely focused on really taking a hard look at the hiring process. And one of the things that's come up since then is if someone is trying to use generative AI for hiring and looking in the rearview mirror, for example, and inputting resumes of the folks that a company has hired in the past, well, the generative AI, of course, is going to make correlations based on that data that it's exposed to, and this impacts people's lives. And certainly the companies need to be mindful of garbage in, garbage out, and not necessarily being appropriate for the world that is much more diverse than perhaps looking in the rearview mirror. And I invite you folks to take a look at that. But mindful that our time today is coming to close, I have a final question for you both, and that is, what growth areas sparked by generative AI are you personally most excited about, and how do you see this changing our lives and careers in the future?
I am most excited about all of the ways that we will expand creativity and opportunity that's good for people on the planet through all of these tools out there. I'm super excited by the potential for it to help with climate change, also for productivity, reduction in carbon emissions. I'm very, very excited for all it has ahead for us in the worlds of video production and content creation. I think it's going to be incredible. And also how we're able to communicate with each other and potentially improve work-life balance.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's really about the education piece, right? Imagine that these large language models, like they're already doing this, and there's a lot of companies that are doing this, but creating individualized learning paths for folks that are currently out in the workforce that are wanting to learn something, but I think more impactfully for our young people, right? And to help both educators and parents really start to build out customized learning paths for their children to understand how can they learn the best and build something out that is going to be uniquely for them. I think that's going to be a really amazing tool as we start to look to the future. And, as I talked about, for everyone to be able to become, a superhero in the field that they want to be with the help of AI and generative AI, being able to create that coursework for you or create that ability for you to do it.
Thank you, Ali and Chris. With that, we are out of time for today's session. It's clear that change in the workplace is accelerating. As we discussed, the adoption curve of generative AI remains steep, and it will likely impact all facets of business life. That creates both opportunities and challenges. As we look back on transformations such as internet adoption, e-commerce, and mobile, to name a few, we see how these new technologies changed all our lives. Recall the times, if you are old enough, that mobile was something new and different than the web. Now, no one thinks of mobile as anything. Everything is mobile. In just a few short years, we will consider AI as part of everything too. Some things, however, will never change, such as the desire to be fulfilled in one's life and one's career, and for the need to connect with others. Being kind and fair to our fellow human beings in the workplace and in life will also never go out of style. Employing these powerful new tools requires that we make choices at an accelerated pace, starting now. Making good, ethically sound choices with transparency will be more important than ever. My name is Nick McElveen. On behalf of Ducks in Tech, thank you to our panelists, Chris Bocchicchio of Google and Ali Berger of Etta, for contributing to this important subject. Thank you, our Ducks in Tech audience, for taking time out of your day to learn about generative AI and how to better leverage it in your workplace and in your career. If you'd like, please reach out to us, the panelists, on LinkedIn if you are interested in learning more about generative AI and the topics we covered today. We encourage networking and sharing information. Finally, if you are a University of Oregon Duck and not already a member of Ducks in Tech, the group on LinkedIn, I invite you to join our vibrant group of tech professionals from around the world at ducksintech.com. Special thanks to Megan McKinney of the University of Oregon Alumni Duck Career Network and the University of Oregon Alumni Association for helping make this program possible. Megan, I'll hand it back to you.
Hi, thanks, Nick. Once again, I'm Megan McKinney, the Associate Director of the Duck Career Network. And on behalf of my department and the broader UO Alumni Association, I just want to thank you, Nick, again, for doing a fantastic job moderating this really important discussion this evening. And I so appreciate Chris and Ali for talking about your experiences working in the AI space and sharing your insights around the future of AI and the impact it'll have on all of our careers. I have shared a link in the chat to a brief survey, and you can also scan the QR code you see here on your screen. If you'll take a moment just to fill out that brief event survey, that is really helpful for us as we plan future programs similar to today's. Lastly, in the coming days, I will be following up with all attendees to share a recording of today's webinar, as well as some AI resources that you might find helpful. And so with that, have a great rest of your week, everyone, and go Ducks.